Hello BookTube, Books with Banks back again, finally continuing on my Malazan One Beautiful Scene analysis video series. Sorry for the slight break, but I went on a brief trip out of town, and upon coming back, I really wanted to give myself enough time to really dig into a couple of my favorite scenes from Steven Erikson's Reaper's Gale. This is book 7 in his Malazan Book of the Fallen series, which just so happens to be probably my favorite of the whole series. That said, book 8 could take that title on some days. Anyway, for both videos I want to make about this book, I really wanted to give them the proper respect they deserve, and I wanted to select scenes that are largely representative of what this book is about. And today's video will be focusing on something a little new for this analysis series. Whereas most of my videos have to do with really emotional and heavy and intense dramatic scenes, this one today we're looking at how Erikson writes comedy and how he will sometimes continue on telling his outstanding, thematically rich story, but through the lens of, say, a comedic duo as charming and fascinating as Tehol and Bug. So spoilers ahead for up through about the middle-ish of Book 7, Reaper's Gale. Now, for some context, these two were introduced to us a couple books ago in Midnight Tides, and while they have great chemistry and great comedy in that book as well, I really wanted to save an analysis of this duo for later. So here we are, Book 7. We return to the continent of Lether and the recently Edur-conquered kingdom of Letherus. This duo is constantly trying to undermine the financial stability and economy of Letherus. First, in Midnight Tides, when King Discanar and the Letheri were in power, and especially now by Book 7, now that the Edur have taken over the city under their Edur Empire with Roulette Sengar as the figurehead. More on him in his role as Emperor in my next video. But anyway, Tehol is a brother of Hol and Briss, both other couple important characters in positions of power from Book 5. Through his connections to them, Tehol's connections to his brothers, and through the cunning and deceptively clever business dealings of his manservant, Bug, who, by the way, just so happens to be an elder god, Mael, god of the seas, this duo are building connections and destroying institutions all throughout the various levels of Edur-controlled Letheri society. Whereas in Midnight Tides, it seemed Tehol and Bug wanted to take down the economy a little bit more for fun, maybe more because they could do it, and they were tired of how commercial and materialistic and wealth and debt-driven their entire society was. Here, in Reaper's Gale, these two have a more brutal enemy in the form of not so much the Edur imperial leadership itself, but rather this sort of secret police-style institution, a group called the Patriotists, that has risen up since the fall of the Letheri kingdom proper, and these Patriotists are Letheri people themselves. They're not Edur, but they've remained in power, and they serve the Edur leadership, but really through their own fear tactics and cruelty, these Patriotists are running much of the empire from the shadows. For our favorite financially destructive duo of Tehol and Bug, this simply will not do, so they are back to their old tricks of trying to undermine the very money-focused heart of their city and the broader empire around them. So here we go, and we are in Chapter 5 on pages 178 to 180 of the mass market paperback. Tehol and his manservant Bug are on the rooftop of their home, which is basically one little room in this building down below. And notice in this scene the comedy beautifully interwoven with exposition, interwoven with genuine heart, and the sense of connection between both Tehol and Bug. Alright, here we go. You know, witnessing something is one thing, understanding it another. That's a quote that sort of starts off this passage, and Erikson will often begin a scene with these two in the middle of conversation. He'll drop us in, and our first impression of what's going on is some comment by one or the other. More often than not, we get a Tehol comment. Tehol is the sort of character who seems to enjoy obscuring his actual level of genius under these sort of layers of maybe pseudo-philosophical statements and vague platitudes. On the surface, it would seem that he's fishing for Bug, his manservant slash elder god friend, to ask him to explain himself more, But if we dig a little deeper, we know that these two have known each other for a really long time. We also know that Tehol is no fool, and by this point quite aware of Bug's true identity as an Elder God, a detail we couldn't be sure of through Midnight Tides, but that now, no matter what Tehol may have been aware or suspicious of before, we know as readers, from the way the fifth book ended, we know that Tehol definitely knows about Bug's identity. So Tehol knows Bug is a god, but even more than that, he's had numerous conversations with his manservant like this before, and he started them this way before, with a statement like, witnessing something is one thing, understanding is another, right? And he knows that Tehol probably knows that Bug never responds in quite the way one might expect, so Tehol likely expects the unexpected when it comes to Bug. Try as he might to annoy the manservant with these vague philosophical musings, he knows he might actually be sparking a witty repartee instead. So back to the reading. Bug turned away from his study of the distant river, where the setting sun's light turned the water into a rippled sheet of beaten gold, and frowned at Tehol Benedict. Very pondering of you, master. It was, wasn't it? I have decided that it is my normal eye that witnesses, while it is my blue eye that understands. Does that make sense to you? No. Good, I'm glad. Okay, so another quick break here, because they start talking about something else in the next paragraph, but in this real quick exchange to open the passage, we can kind of laugh, chuckle a bit at how they're sort of talking over one another. Tehel's musing on the difference between understanding and seeing in different ways with his different colored eyes, and Erikson kind of likes to confuse literal with figurative meanings when he's writing these Tehol passages. That's not to say that Tehol is ridiculous for doing so, but rather to show how Tehol enjoys in turn sort of confusing his own audience with this type of thing. And even though Bug says he doesn't understand here, we as readers know that we give him a little more credit than that. We know that he is more than capable of understanding this concept, this idea that witnessing and understanding, the word to see or the verb seeing can mean, or can be a synonym for both of those. And Bug, in truth, he's probably just annoyed or uninterested in this line of his master's thinking. And I, for one, I find it amusing how he dismisses Tehol by saying he doesn't understand, and then how Tehol dismisses Bug's comment, sarcastic or not, by admitting that he's glad his mad servant isn't understanding him. Though, as covered before, we can be fairly certain that Tehol knows Bug too well to be fooled by this sarcasm. Moving on. The night promises to be both heavy and hot, master, and I suggest the mosquito netting. Agreed. Can you get to it? I can't reach. You could if you stretched an arm. What's your point? Nothing. I admit to some distraction. Just now? Yes. Are you over it yet? Almost. Alas, certain individuals are stirring in the city this evening. Well, are you going to do something about... Well, are you going to do something about it, or do I have to do everything around here? Okay, so we see here again something similar to that technique I just mentioned of how Erikson will have Tehol talk about a thing in a literal and figurative context to throw off his audience. But here it's not quite that. What Erikson has done instead is he's introduced a couple of talking points. One, Bug wants Tehol to get the mosquito net down for himself. And two, Bug is distracted by upsetting things going on in the city. And so the comedic part comes in with Tehol being vague, he asks how they should go about doing something about it, and, just having these words something and it. They're not helpful in clarifying which of the above 2 points Tehel's actually talking about, the trouble in the city or the mosquito net. And so then the subtle punchline to this, Bug walked across the roof to stand beside the bed. He studied the reposed form of Tehol Benedict for a moment. Then he collected the netting and draped it over his master. So this is funny. However, we can definitely see that Bug is in fact as distracted and upset as he claims for his sort of punchline to what Tehel's setting up here. It's not a spoken response. He just sort of cuts the legs out from Tehel's wit by refusing to acknowledge any kind of punchline he's supposed to deliver, at least verbally, and then Tehol has often set him up well for this sort of thing in the past, but at the end of the day, Bug just, does the simple task that one might expect, an onlooker might expect, who doesn't know these two, a manservant, to do for his master, getting the net down, covering him in the net. Alright. Eyes, one brown, the other blue, blinked up at him. Shouldn't there be a frame or something? I feel that I'm being ready for my own funeral here. We used the frame for this morning's fire. Well, is this going to keep me from being bitten? Probably not, but it looks rather fetching. Tehol closed his blue eye. I see. Bug sighed. Gallows humor, master. My, you are in a state, aren't you? Okay, so notice the callback to the first exchange that opened the scene. If Bug is too distracted, then Tehol will kind of have to just give, deliver his own punchlines to his own joke setups. And by the way, if you watch stand-up comedy routines and stuff, you might recognize this technique, like when a great comedian seemingly at the end of one final seemingly unrelated story at the end of their set seems to be a joke all on its own. In this case, the mosquito netting has a blanket or outfit and not an actual protective structure, and then the comedian might catch all of us off guard by tying things back into an earlier joke setup. And again, in our case, this would be the fact that Tehol sees what Bug is saying about the fetching look of the mosquito net by referencing his comment about his eyes from earlier. When it's his brown eye, then seeing means it's more literal witnessing synonym instead of its more figurative understanding one. Furthermore, in writing a scene like this, Erikson isn't just delivering some random goofy lines of dialogue for us to chuckle at, but he's also displaying the character's own wit and giving us as readers a little bit more to think about. A character didn't just, do something crass like fart or comment on Ublala Pung's size or anything like that. We actually have, as readers, have to be paying enough attention to keep up with the witty back and forth. And I think Erikson knows that this is a more engaging style of comedy and character work. So moving on from there. Bug sighed. Gallows humor, master? My, you are in a state, aren't you? I am undecided, Bug said, nodding. Yes, I know, one of my eternal flaws. What you require, old friend, is a mortal's perspective on things. So let's hear it. Lay out the dilemma for me, Bug, so that I might provide you with a properly pithy solution. The errant follows the Warlock King to see what he plans. The Warlock King meddles with nefarious rituals set in place by another Ascendant, who in turn leaves off eating a freshly killed corpse and makes for an unexpected rendezvous with said Warlock King, where they will probably make each other's acquaintance, then bargain to mutual benefit over the crumbling chains binding another Ascendant, one soon to be freed, which will perturb someone far to the north, although that one is probably not yet ready to act. In the meantime, the long-departed Eater fleet skirts the Draconian Sea and shall soon enter the river mouth, on its fated return to our fair city, and with it are two fell champions, neither of whom is likely to do what is expected of them. Now, to add spice to all of that, the secret that is the soul of one Scabandary blood I will, in a depressingly short time, cease to be a secret, and consequently, and in addition to, and concomitant with, we are in for an interesting summer. Okay, so here we get, first and foremost, it's really just a great deal of catching up and exposition about the sorry state of things in Lethris, a city that these two characters clearly care something for, but really at the end is the most important part for our analysis here, and that's with these repetitive conclusive statements. And consequently, in addition to, concomitant with, saying the same thing over and over. And as any good writer knows, if you're saying the same thing over and over again, it's kind of just a waste of space, waste of time. It seems to me that Erikson perfectly timed this to reflect how tired Bug is of having to deal with Lethris and clean up all of these messy political situations. It's kind of like when someone keeps asking you if you're upset, you're feeling okay, you're sure you're feeling fine, you don't look like you're feeling fine, are you mad, are you angry? something bothering you. It definitely feels like something's bothering you, and then eventually you finally snap and just unload everything weighing on your mind. So not only is it a recap and exposition of other plot lines happening in the book, but it's also a really relatable moment for Bug. And there you go, Erickson's just made us, the reader, be able to relate to an elder god. And then even after the repetition, we get, quote, "We are in for an interesting summer." It's sort of like, so you have this great juxtaposition of the hyperbolic repetition followed by a really swift understatement that undercuts all of that. So even one of the more serious and straightforward paragraphs of the scene has a bit of humor in it as well. Anyway, moving on. This is Tehol that starts speaking here. "Is that all? Not in the least, but one mouthful at a time, I always say. No, you don't. Shirkalal is the one always saying that. Your penchant for disgusting images, master, is as... Sorry. Your penchant for disgusting images, master, is as ever poorly timed and thoroughly inappropriate. Now, about that pithy solution of yours." Quick pause here, just to provide a bit of context before this kind of more crass joke. In contrast to the witty humor I mentioned above, here's Erickson proving there is in fact a place, even in his books, for these slightly more crude, quick jokes as well. If you haven't read the book, this Shirkalal character that they're talking about, the one who Tehol says would be commenting on mouthfuls, she's an undead young woman who likes to make herself up and bathes in perfumes to be able to enjoy, whatever carnal affairs with men. So if you haven't read it and didn't get the joke in there, it's basically just a sex joke about mouthfuls, and someone more familiar with like a certain type of mouthful. That's basically all you're missing there. Again, nothing quite as witty as everything else going on in this chapter, but Erickson does work that into the context pretty nicely. Now on to them discussing the patriotist Inquisition type of organization that I mentioned when I was introducing the scene. "Well, I admit to disappointment. You didn't even mention my grand scheme to bankrupt the Empire. The Invigilator now hunts for you in earnest. Karos Invictad? No wonder you put me under a shroud. I shall endeavor to be close to the roof's edge the day he clambers into view with his drooling henchmen, so that I can fling myself over the side, which, you'll agree, is far preferable to even one bell's worth of his infamous ghastly Inquisition. In the meantime, what's for supper?" Again, more humor. Erickson really just doesn't let up here. He rarely gives us a break between laughs with any of these Tehol Bug conversations. Two quick things to point out, though. This comment from Tehol is much more akin, I think, to what we might think of as gallows humor, which is how Bug had described Tehol's earlier jokes. So perhaps this is to show Tehol's he's catching up to Bug with this same more depressed, sour mood, despite his kind of more flippant, lackadaisical tone. In truth, he is taking some things pretty seriously, like this Inquisition type of group. Also, this is another fantastic kind of tonal subversion, undercutting what we're feeling. When closing out this paragraph, he's joking about jumping off the roof and avoiding an Inquisition, but then Tehol simply asks about what's for dinner. And if you haven't read these books, just know that their dinners are usually a whole kind of comedy routine on their own. You'll see a little bit of that now here. "Vinnick eggs. I found a somewhat broken nest washed up under a dock. But vinnick eggs are poisonous, hence the clouds of complaining gulls constantly circling over every nasty little floating island. It's a matter of proper cooking, master, and the addition of a few essential herbs that serve to negate most of the ill effects. Most? Yes. And do you have in your possession those life-sustaining herbs? Well, no, but I thought I'd improvise." "There you have it." "There I have what, master?" "Why, my pithy reply, of course." Bug squinted at Tehol Benedict, who winked, this time closing his brown eye. The elder god scowled, then said, "Thank you, master. What would I ever do without you?" Scant little, I'd wager. And there you have it. At the end of the scene, despite not seeming to be on the same page at first, they both prove to be pretty much on the same page by the end of it, and they're definitely inseparable. They tie everything back to the eyes discussion and this kind of this eye's sort of symbolism that's carried throughout the whole thing. They're not only, witnessing each other, but they actually do understand each other. So even though I just read through less than 3 pages in a 1,200 plus page book, I hope this helped to highlight how, or at least some of the ways in which Erikson weaves humor into such a massive epic, and how these more comical scenes can be more thought-provoking than they might appear at first glance. I also wanted to give you all a bit of a palate cleanser, because my next video, I'll be talking about a scene much later in this book, looking at Roulette's reaction to a horrific, tragic moment. So to get notified when that video is posted, please subscribe if you aren't already. If you've enjoyed the video, please like and or subscribe, and it would mean a lot if you could recommend it to friends or share it on whatever platforms. And then especially if, let's say, you know someone who read these books but the Tehol and Bug stuff never quite worked for them. I would love to hear from people who either love this duo down in the comments, but I would also equally love to hear from anyone who might have found their bantering and bickering maybe a bit more of a tonal distraction, and kind of took them out of the book. Yeah, again, please let me know what you think about this scene, my analysis of it down in the comments. Thank you all so much for watching. Have a good night. Bye.